Welcome to another episode of Four Guys Talking About AI. I'm here with my buddies Greg Sterling and John Gerard. Our friend Neil Polachek is not able to make it today. But what's up, guys? How you doing?
Good, Andy. Nice to see you.
Great to see you guys. So big week in the world of AI. Top of our menu here, we've got a bunch of things. Gibber Talk. It's a new thing. It's a new protocol. The way computers are talking to each other via audio. So voice AI to voice AI kind of thing. So we'll get into that. AI reporters, some interesting things happening on that front. Bunch of new tools for agents, creating agents using AI and large language models, robots and AI companions. So many interesting things going on this week. Let's jump into it. John, Gibber Talk. Let's talk about that. Like what you uncovered that one really interesting thing that's going on there.
Yeah, it's called GibberLink. And I'll just kind of give you the overview, but you're going to have to see this for yourself because it is pretty bizarre. Now, the demo I think that they put out has been done with some dramatic intent. So it looks pretty wild the way that things are happening. But here's what GibberLink is. The inevitability in the world that we're living in right now is that an AI agent is going to run into another AI agent out in the world. Oh, there's my little AI agent giving a thumbs up on the screen. So AI agents are starting to collide in the real world as, for instance, an AI that is trying to set an appointment on behalf of somebody runs into an AI that is receiving appointment requests for a business. So what this protocol allows for is first for the AIs to mutually recognize one another as AIs, and then to decide to change to a different, more efficient, less lossy way of communicating over the phone in this case. And that protocol is called GibberLink. It basically uses compression technologies in order to change the communication that happens between these AIs to make it much faster, much more efficient. Now, I'm not sure. I think in reading through the protocol, you can kind of compress whatever you want. So they have the abilities to simply compress the output from the LLM itself. So it is actually natural language in real English that's getting compressed. But as you'll hear, if you watch it, it doesn't sound anything like natural language to our ears. It's really unusual. In fact, if anything, it's a little bit reminiscent of me sitting in my dad's den when I was 14 years old on my first modem, with that sort of crackle
Dial up.
yeah, and some beeping and whatever. And there's a reason perhaps that it sounds a little bit like that. This is indeed an acoustic protocol. So they're not switching over to just chatting digitally, through the wires or the internet. Although I suspect that would be kind of the next obvious thing to do. So it's an acoustic protocol, one AI talking to another AI in a way to be much more efficient and to avoid lossiness. So what this will help to do is to allow AIs that collide out in the real world to communicate more efficiently and to not lose anything in the request or the response. And it's pretty mind-blowing.
So an example of that would be something like you tell Siri or whatever other agent you want to tell to make an appointment to get a haircut or whatever. You could make a reservation at a restaurant or whatever, right? And then that agent calls up the restaurant. That restaurant coincidentally has a voice AI that answers. They recognize each other. It's like a funny thing. It's like there's a joke in here, like two AIs walking. But so they meet each other and then they switch over to GibberLink and communicate, and then they are able to. I would imagine that would probably open up more capability in that moment, right? Because then once they realize that they're a couple of AIs talking to each other, then all the decision trees and all the pathways that can happen at that point probably open up a lot of flexibility to be able to do a lot more in that moment.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, what's going to be interesting to see here. So one thing you could obviously do in this situation is you could say, hey, do you want to just switch over to the internet? I'll contact you at XYZ, IP address / whatever. Okay, cool. See you there. Right. Like, so that would be a way to do this. But even if you do that, the question is, then what, right? So most likely, we're not going back from this idea of LLMs, and we've talked about this on here before. LLMs are unusually good at interpreting natural language, and they're unusually good at pushing natural language responses out. And the nice thing about that is that that means that AIs can sit on either side of the conversation in an LLM. They can receive natural language input and do a really good job of interpreting it, and they can spit it back out. Well, that's actually a pretty good setup for two AIs having a conversation together and getting something done. So, except in some rare cases where, like let's say the DMV, where you've got very specific rigid things that you can do or you can't do, or maybe financial services where you really want it to be protocol driven, or these are the only things you can do. It's probably better to leave it a little bit open ended and just let the AIs hash it out in conversation.
It's really interesting. I would love a DMV AI to do that.
This makes me think, as we were discussing before the call, about ChatGPT operator or Claude's agent, or some of the deep research. These tools now that are, and then there's Manus, which is the new sort of Chinese that's supposed to be able to do just a ton of stuff autonomously. So there's that, and this protocol would seem to facilitate all of those things. And then there's the question of like the future of interaction with content and the future of web design, and how all of this information. I mean, I know in this context of the demo that we're talking about, there was a phone call, but there's a way in which when I was using Operator, the ChatGPT agent, it was just really kind of clunky. It was like very slow, and it was emulating kind of human behavior, and that seems like a real kind of alpha step, and that there's something much more efficient and accelerated that's tied into this somehow, that's on the horizon.
Yeah, it's like once you enable webhooks into that, and then you can open up this huge library of capabilities from there. And you create these kind of workflows, like if you ever used Zapier or Make.com.
Yeah. Yes,
kind of sequence or scenarios, as Make calls them. That kind of thing. You can see how I would imagine that very soon the AIs will be able to create those scenarios themselves, because like you mentioned, I think on the last episode, John, if you start with the goal and the end in mind, and you tell the AI this is your goal, it's going to figure out what those steps are to get there. So the acceleration of this is really fascinating. One of the things I've been thinking about as all this kind of new technology is emerging is the go-to-market for this, and the adoption of it, and how you got larger enterprises that have resources to be able to put against this. Then you have medium-sized businesses that may not, and certainly small businesses are challenged in terms of how to adopt these kinds of things. What are your thoughts about that? Like, where do you think that some of this stuff becomes? What's the interface to adopt some of these capabilities? You're a business, you want to be able to adopt it, but
there's a little bit of a kind of a cold start marketplace, two-sided marketplace issue here on some level. I mean, maybe not, because the LLM can effectively stand in the place of the human and can interact with the human on the other end, or the conventional internet interface on the other end. So maybe it's not as big an issue, but I mean, small businesses are challenged to, I was at a quick digression. I was at a small business marketing webinar in San Francisco this week, and these businesses were, some were more sophisticated than others. All of them use ChatGPT, all of them, but they're not able to do certain kinds of marketing things that digital marketers would say, oh, this is really essential, that claim your business profile and do all these things. So they're gravitating toward ChatGPT because it's really simple. It's like Google. It's very simple and intuitive to use. And that's really, in order to have adoption at a small business level, you need to, in a DIY kind of way, you need to make it so simple, for people to adopt. Otherwise, you're relying on some, middle integrator third party to disseminate that tool. And I think there's a lot of friction there.
Yeah. And in the first inning of all of this, John, remember you and I were digging into all these prompt libraries, and there people started to sprout up these prompt libraries, and they were selling prompts, like little applets or little apps kind of a thing, where you could buy these prompts to have your whatever your ad optimizer prompt or what have you. That was sort of like the most recent kind of large innovation that happens with large language models. And then that was the very next thing that started to pop up. And I feel like with all the agent new capabilities that are coming with agents, that there's going to have to be some sort of like accessibility to them. And I'm curious to know what that interface or what that experience would look like for businesses to adopt it in that kind of, make it germane to their workflow.
Yeah, my guess is that if we look to science fiction and to Black Mirror episodes, we get some answers on this. And in particular, I think that we see, let's say, a catalog of personalities, right? So you see, like, would you like Rose? This is how Rose behaves. Here's Rose's voice. Here's all the things she's really good at. The overemphasizes this kind of service as opposed to that one. Or would you like Darren? And Darren is a little bit more like this. Here's Darren's voice. He has a nice British accent. So I suspect that we head down that path. All of this ultimately has been about making this technology feel more human and making it more interesting and appealing to us as humans, to sort of cross the uncanny divide in our sort of assessment or reaction to this stuff as we first experience it. And we even see that a little bit in some of the early strangeness that was or is prompt engineering. Like there's nothing natural about good prompt engineering if you sort of look at the long sort of tortured phrases that people use in order to tweak and tune these LLMs, using words to get what they want out of them. So I think we go closer and closer and closer to this sort of human experience, and I would predict a catalog of agent personalities that you can point to and interact with and say, yeah, you know what, Rose, you're hired.
I love that. That is so interesting, and what a great way to view it. I think you're right. I mean, it makes a lot of sense what you're saying, and it's all about personifying these experiences. It's really fascinating, and how that will evolve. And sort of like the next topic on our list here is AI reporters, and I can see how in that same way you're going to have these personas that are news reporters or news front end to telling various different stories, or maybe agents that specialize on certain topics. Greg, you want to talk a little bit about this the AI news reporters?
Yeah. So in I believe in Japan and maybe in China, but I'm not sure. In Southeast Asia, there have been, certainly Japan, news readers, what the BBC would call a news reader, an anchor, who have been AI generated as sort of a virtual news reader. And in the last couple of weeks, the Arizona Supreme Court has introduced two AI avatars who are news anchors, essentially, or news reporters, that they're going to use to disseminate information about court decisions and topics relevant to the law to help educate the public. And they will be available on the website of the Arizona Supreme Court and also on social media accounts. And presumably they'll give short updates. Once a woman, once a man. They'll give short updates or announce decisions or whatever. And it was fascinating to me because I think this is sort of the beginning of something that we'll see much more of, especially in the larger context of how people are relating to AI avatars, developing relationships with them, being completely comfortable talking to them. That we'll see more as an engagement tool, but maybe even as a replacement for humans in some contexts. I mean, you could easily see this is a very inexpensive way to have a kind of an engaging presentation of news versus a human. Humans have, big salaries in many cases if you're working for local news, or if you're a publisher and you want to create a different dimension to your own content, you could just slap one of these on there, and suddenly you've created this very different experience for people. So I think it's the beginning of something really interesting that may either sort of enlarge the pie or may in the end threaten some job somewhere as people try and save money.
Yeah. I mean, this is, we first saw the example of this, or at least I did, actually in the last Olympics cycle. There was the AI Al Michaels that would give you a daily update on, all of the sports that you cared about. And it was his voice was cloned, and it was actually not half bad. Definitely sort of push the buttons internally, like, all right, that's probably Al Michaels if you recognize that voice. So it's interesting and unsurprising but fascinating to see that this is kind of the next step in that evolution. And this goes a little bit to something else we've talked about before, which is that with the rise of these tools, what you inevitably get is a combinatorial explosion in the amount of content that's out there and available. Because, the cost to create it and produce relatively good, interesting stuff basically goes to zero. So now what do you do with that? Well, you could flood the internet with garbage and you get the gray goo problem. And certainly some of that is happening. But the other thing you can do with that is this sort of hyper personalization. And that's kind of what's showing up in some of these models. Like, what if somebody created an amazing Hollywood blockbuster style movie just for me? Like, it was just specific to me, or a pop song, weaving together, my favorite artist that was just for me, audience of one kind of stuff. Well, this is the same thing. My own personal journalist, that I can have a relationship with, or at least feel like I do, that knows who I am, what I care about, uses the words and phrases I'm familiar with, the voice I get to know and I get to appreciate. By the way, on that note, I still miss that Siri voice that they took away, or not the Siri voice, the Chat GPT voice that they took away 6 months ago. That was a deep and important relationship to me. So I think they're doing a good job, pushing our emotional buttons and getting us to actually feel real human things for these agents.
Right. I mean, you can today, I don't use it, but Google has a Discover feed, which is the sort of news feed if you're signed in, and they kind of capture all your personal behavior, and then they turn that around and give you the news. They turn that into an AI podcast using the same technology that they use for Notebook LM. So it would be very simple. I mean, the human voice, and then beyond that, or sort of a voice that has some emotional depth, and then beyond that, sort of the physical appearance of an avatar. I mean, all of this stuff is getting so good that people won't care if it's a human or if it's an avatar at some point. These Arizona Supreme Court avatars are still in the uncanny valley territory, but it's going to very soon be the case that, maybe you customize the avatar, you pick a voice, you pick a physical appearance, and that becomes the vehicle for the delivery of whatever information you're looking for. And if you're a publisher, you take your content, you throw it into an AI, create a script, and then boom, you feed it to your avatar, and there's a totally new channel plus video, right? It goes on YouTube, it goes on TikTok, whatever. It's pretty interesting to contemplate.
You can also see how the experience will change as well, right? Like, you can query it, right? Right now, everything we're talking about is just the news to the listener. Yeah. But, if you're in the middle of a story and you're like, hey, tell me more about that. Or, when there's news again about this, bring it back into my news feed. I'm interested in following that story. I've always wished there was like a bot that did that you could just, like, at the end of a story, just, hey, remind me when the next part of this comes out. And because we always lose threads of that storyline goes out of the news, but there's obviously still more information.
I mean, all these news aggregators, Google News and Yahoo News and Apple News, and there are a number of others that exist. I mean, why couldn't you turn that into a broadcast or a one-to-one sort of personal news, and then do what you're suggesting, Andy, which is I can stop it and I can query it. Hey, what do you have any more information about this aspect of the story?
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I could definitely see how that's where news evolves to. It's really interesting because this is a moment in time where many publishers are challenged with their business model. They're always been challenged over since the digital era, but we are now again at a new kind of era with AI, and there's a range of perspectives as to how publishers should adopt this kind of technology. I could see some publishers going all in on this and saying, we're going to make it conversational, and we're going to make it so that there are reminders built into it, so that if that topic is of interest to you, then we'll just put it back into your newsfeed and stay relevant as a news source, as opposed to you going elsewhere.
Or you could just say more like this, right? This is the way you flag a particular area of content. I mean, this is so easily imaginable that I wouldn't be surprised if in a month or two we hear about some startup that's bringing some avatar to some personalized news feed. But you could, right now more Americans are getting news from social media than they are from any other single source. And you could really imagine a shift over time where some version of this is the sort of primary tool through which people are getting news and information.
Definitely. Like the follow button is powerful, right? Or the thumbs up button.
Again, I keep coming back to this idea of this personal human relationship. You know what I mean? I mean, what's funny is that we've known this about companies forever. It's the whole story and study of brands and why brands matter. It's basically because we anthropomorphize everything, including the companies that we interact with. But it's so much more clear, so much more evident that that's going on when we have something kind of impersonating a human. But it doesn't make it any less bizarre or crazy that it's happening. Like, these are going to be real, like, at least on the human side of the equation, they're going to be real human relationships that people are experiencing.
Yeah. And the personalization with all of that really cuts through a lot of the noise of the volume that's going to be produced by AI in general. So, John, just what you said earlier is, when you can create this highly personalized experience that's curated for that audience of one, maybe it is just simply like with a like button or a, save this or follow or whatever the mechanism is to be able to find out more. I could see how a publisher that could adopt that kind of capability. They've got a ton of content already, and with just some enabling technology, they could really retain that audience in a new and compelling way.
As a final note on this story, I'm increasingly listening to news stories. I have all these news publications, news apps on my phone. And, typically what I would do is I'd open the news app, scroll through the headlines, maybe scan a particular article. And now more and more of them have these AI generated news reading. You could listen to this story kind of button. And I'm finding that to be a much more satisfying way to consume news. I listen to the whole story. I get much more information out of that than trying to scan it on my phone, which is too small. And so, so this is a sort of interim step to what we're talking about.
So you're probably more productive as a result of that, even if it's just walking your dog while you're listening to it or whatever.
That's what I'm doing. I'm walking my dog and listening to these stories. It's exactly what I'm doing. So.
Very cool. All right. Well, let's go on to our next topic. As we're talking about all this personification and technology, there's a huge boom in the coaching world, right? This is all part of this whole wave.
I mean, I think there was an interesting story in the Atlantic that was talking about this sort of proliferation of coaching in every conceivable industry, and people spending a lot of money on coaching to get to get sort of training or accountability or expertise, access to expertise, and that all came out of a story that I read on Fortune about how companies were starting to use AI coaches to do management training because people are bad managers. They don't get any training. And so this was a kind of a way to address that. And it's just very interesting to think about this larger context of coaching, people turning to humans for their expertise, sometimes paying a lot of money. It's an alternative to therapy in some cases. In other cases, it's something very different. As an aside, they escape a lot of the licensing requirements that exist in other professions. One of the things that Neil and I have done in various surveys that we've asked people, small businesses and others, consumers, are you interested in an AI coach? And, who would you trust to provide an AI coach? And what we found pretty uniformly is that people are interested in this. They see these things as beneficial to them. they would pay money for them. Who would provide it is variable, and in what context. But there's an appetite for people to use coaches or to find support from outside. And AI would be an inexpensive way, comparatively inexpensive way to do that. I mean, we already know that people are turning to AI therapists, and more apps are building in a kind of coach-like aspect to them, especially like fitness and so on and so forth. So this is definitely a trend I think that will increase. And it ties in with the stuff you were saying, John, about the emotional relationship. I mean, you'll develop a relationship with your coach who will be personified, and that person will be a trusted source of advice. I know people who are preparing for meetings in companies by asking ChatGPT, what should I ask about? This is the situation. How should I respond? How should I deal with this problem employee who's, so on and so forth. I mean, that's already happening. And so I can imagine, kind of consistent with what we were just talking about, people developing relationships with these coaches being domain experts and using them in all kinds of areas of their lives: food, exercise, wellness, mental health, career counseling, parenting, across the board. I mean, I think we're just going to see lots and lots of these things, and they're going to really compete with the humans because they'll be cheap. I mean, to see a therapist today in a major metro area is a $200 plus an hour proposition. An AI therapist is not necessarily going to be the same thing, but that's going to be $10 a month, $20 a month,
And the output might be a whole lot better too.
It might be comparable or better. And taste tests, A/B tests have sort of shown that people have a strong affinity for AI generated content.
Yeah. Well, look, I can say right now, and I'll out myself. I have an AI coach, which is up here, and mostly true story. I put it together myself in ChatGPT. I basically trained it up, and what I did was I put in a series of prompts saying, "Hey, this is who you are. You're an expert in these kinds of things. Ask me 20 questions. They're going to help you to know more about me and help me to navigate my professional and personal life. And then on any of those, you can ask me up to 2 follow-ups." And it asked some amazing questions and learned the basics. And I've actually been leaning into it from time to time just to sort of see what that experience is like. So I actually wrote it up because I've been sharing it with people. I'd be happy to post that in the show notes, like the series of prompts that you can use.
For sure.
Yeah, and what I'll say, just based on from an experience standpoint, so I still find ChatGPT's voice or its tone just a little bit sort of like, it's not quite stilted, but it's fairly it's a very neutral voice that becomes a bit predictable over time. So that's still there. I think you can probably prompt that out a little bit. What I found that's extraordinary is that it brings up all these personal details that I have offered up to it, that it references in its responses and in its advice. I just had a business thing come up that was frustrating and kind of it triggered a fear response in me. And I actually asked the coach, like, "Hey, what would you do about this? What would you suggest?" And it was an unbelievably good and impressive and powerful response. Like, so much so that I was like, it's a really good idea. I think I'm going to take that and run with it with a few modifications. So it's real. I'm a believer.
Language model, or are you using just the standard?
Just the standard. Yeah. Didn't need the bigger heavyweight to pull it off.
You didn't do a custom GPT. You just did that in ChatGPT.
No, I just did it all in ChatGPT, and I think the thing that makes the difference is this idea of ask me questions that are going to help you to provide me direction.
And just by way of doing that, are you going back to the same thread, or do you just ask in a new thread and it already responds?
No, I go back to the same thread every time. So I've got a coach thread that I go back to, and it's got all this little memory built into it. Now, a lot of this stuff is also being stored to the memory more broadly, but it's all in the same thread.
So cool.
It's very, very interesting. So you're living validation of that thesis.
Giving it a shot. It started as an experiment, and I would say now that it's a habit.
That's really interesting. Yeah, post the show notes in the show notes. Post the prompt in there. I'll give it a try.
Yeah, happy to do it.
Sounds really interesting. All right. Well, I think we're on time here. So thanks, you guys, that was a really compelling conversation. Thank you. Hope everybody else enjoyed it, and look forward to seeing y'all next week.
You almost sound surprised, Andy.
No, I mean, it was just like,
It's weird. That was actually a good one.
no, it wasn't just that it was a surprise. It just happened to be even more compelling because I thought that we covered some really interesting topics today and cracked them open. So
There was a kind of organic quality to the discussion. It was all kind of weaved together. So yeah, I agree.
very good. All right. Well, cool, guys.
Awesome.
Thank you all.
All right. Take
Talk
care.
Thanks, everybody.
Next
Bye,
time.
Yeah.